What's up, everybody? This is Roman Gennaro, host of the Empire Sports Talk podcast, and here we go. We have a lot to cover today. We are approaching our 100th episode, so thank you all of those who have stuck with us as we've grown ever so slowly. We have noticed. Thank you so much. Jumping right into this because we have a lot to cover today. This is going to be maybe a little bit of a longer one. The first thing I want to talk about, the biggest news over the weekend, number one Alabama getting upset by Vanderbilt. If you've been living under a rock for the last 48 hours, that's right, I said Vanderbilt. The Vanderbilt Commodores, the Harvard of the Southeast, as some would say. The baseball school, the Vanderbilt Commodores, defeated the Alabama Crimson Tide 45-40 on Saturday, marking the biggest win ever for the school and one of the biggest losses ever for a perennial powerhouse that, despite the loss of Nick Saban, did have its sights set on the national championship game. Now, I'm not necessarily going to go into what happened in the game. It wasn't good. Let's leave it at that. What I will say is that this confirmed one thing to me that I said prior to the season. If you remember reading my college football predictions, if you listened to the show around the time of the hiring, I was not a fan of Alabama bringing in Kalen DoBoer. I said he's not ready for the SEC. His only big-time coaching job was Washington, and he made it to the national championship game because he brought Michael Penix with him. He had been at Indiana. He had been at Fresno State. Those are different than the SEC. His biggest competition in the Pac-12 was from Bo Nix and Oregon, a quarterback who failed in the SEC. And so I said that between me thinking that he's not ready for that big a jump, to not just go from Washington to the SEC, but to go from Washington to Alabama to succeed Nick Saban. I say it all the time on this podcast. You don't want to be the guy after the guy. And that's the situation that Kalen DoBoer finds himself in. And I said at the time that I was not a fan of how quickly they snatched up DeBoer, how quickly they replaced Nick Saban. I thought that they went after the newest, shiniest toy, and they didn't necessarily go for the best fit. I thought the best fit would have been Dabo Swinney, but the timing seemed right to me. Things were going downhill at Clemson. He's an Alabama grad. It just seemed obvious. Similarly as obvious to back when Les Miles seemed destined to end up at Michigan, and then he didn't. Maybe that's a situation we have here. But I was very vocal about how I did not think this was the right fit, and I've said any chance I had that I thought Kalen DoBoer would go 2-2 against Auburn and be out in 4 years. And yes, that's not the metric that most people do, but when you have a rivalry as heated as Alabama-Auburn, if you go back and watch the ESPN 30 for 30 that came out in 2011, head coach Bill Curry of the Crimson, who coached the Crimson Tide from 87 to 89, realized after that third loss to Auburn, he went 0-3. He said, I knew I was getting fired because you don't get 3 shots at Auburn, lose, and keep your job. So you see how much weight, if you're not involved in the rivalry to the extent of this is not one of your favorite teams, or like you're not as involved in SEC stuff as a lot of people, the success or failure of a coach can be largely defined by the head-to-head record against your fiercest rival. And so it wouldn't surprise me if he went 2-2 in 4 years and found himself out of a job. And I know you're gonna hear me talk about him now and say, but he beat Georgia last week. And that's true. He beat Georgia a week ago. But a couple of things. What we know in football, there is such thing as the trap game, which is the smaller game that comes before the big game. And there's the hangover game, which is the smaller game that comes after the big game. And this would qualify in the hangover game situation, where it's yes, Kalen DoBoer beat Georgia, but let's not forget that Georgia staged a fierce comeback after Alabama was out to a huge lead, 30-7, and took the lead towards the end of the game, and Alabama had to get it back. And Carson Beck had 4 turnovers, 3 interceptions, and a fumble. If Carson Beck plays remotely well, Georgia finishes that comeback and takes down the Tide. I look at this and I said, well, yes, he got the big win. But a couple of things stood out. A lot of those players are still Saban's guys. It's like a lot of them transferred out. A lot of new guys showed up. The 17-year-old freshman wide receiver, Ryan Williams, is a standout in this freshman class. That is all DeBoer. I'll give him that. But a lot of these guys are still Saban guys. I'd be really interested to see next year when more of those Saban guys move out, including the likely departure of quarterback Jalen Milroe, when the Alabama quarterback room at the moment is rather shaky. Going into last year, it wasn't a foregone conclusion that Milroe would be the starter all through the year, but nobody behind him stepped up to take it. So the quarterback room at the moment is a bit shaky. That's going to be a big thing. The other thing is, it's become clear in the last couple of weeks that the culture that Nick Saban set up is gone, and it's gone quickly. The culture under Nick Saban had its problems. They had their players had run-ins with the law and that kind of thing. But on the field, it was mostly about discipline. You would never see guys throwing up middle fingers in post-game photos or backflipping on the field during play. Things we've seen in Kalen DoBoer's era. These are things that Nick Saban would rip your head off for. And I heard a story this week from Greg McElroy, and he said that when they won the national championship and when he was a senior, they go into the locker room after the game, and Nick Saban gets up in front of everybody and he says, "For you seniors, congratulations. This was a great accomplishment. You've earned it. We were the best team all season. Congratulations. You're going out on top." And then he pauses for a second and he says, "To everybody else, we were terrible in the second half. We did this and this and this and this." And Greg McElroy sat back and goes, "Wow, like, we just won the national championship, and here he is ripping guys a new one for, missing assignments in the second half and this and that." And he said, "I was a senior. I didn't care." But Nick Saban never stopped coaching. That was part of the culture at the University of Alabama. On the field, at least, it was ultra disciplined. Act like you've been here before. And we've seen on multiple occasions under Kalen DoBoer in wins and in this loss, things that Nick Saban never would have tolerated. And yes, you're going to say, stop living in the past with Nick Saban. He's gone. It's a new time. Players, whatever, they get paid. They don't care. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe players don't care anymore. My point is, Kalen DoBoer, as I mentioned, has the unfortunate situation of being the guy after the guy. And now he's got this horrible loss on his record. And Nick Saban himself has gone on record as saying the only place in the SEC that it's not difficult to play is Vanderbilt. And here we are on a Monday evening when we're recording this, and Alabama has lost to Vanderbilt. Just how bad a loss is this? In the last 24 years, since the year 2000, Vanderbilt is 99 and 193. That is a win percentage of .339. They are 38 and 157 in the SEC. In an article that came out in April of 2022, Alabama was ranked as the third winningest team of the century, and Vanderbilt was the third worst. That's the latest data that I could come up with on that, but the records are up to date. So the 99 and 193 does take into account this game last week. And so it's not too far off to say that Vanderbilt, for the last quarter century, has been one of the worst, if not the worst, Power 5 school in the country. And they go and play one of the best, and they win by 5 points. There are times when a head coach's tenure somewhere can be defined by one thing. with guys like Saban and Kirby Smart and Bill Belichick in the NFL and Jimmy Johnson, both at Miami and in the Dallas Cowboys, their tenures were defined by championships. For guys like Gus Bradley in the NFL, when he was the head coach of the Jacksonville Jaguars, his career there was defined as being statistically one of the worst head coaches in NFL history. Josh McDaniels' turns as an NFL head coach have been defined by loss and failure and scandal. Urban Meyer's very short NFL tenure defined by scandal. And I fear that no matter what Kalen DoBoer does now, short of winning a national championship, which I do not think is likely, this year's his best chance, because I do believe that after Jalen Milroe leaves, it's going to be more difficult. But I don't think they're going to win this year, because if it comes down to it, they still have to play Oklahoma. If it comes down to it, and they are on the outside looking in, now that's 13 instead of 5, but Alabama's currently ranked 7 as we record this podcast. If Alabama were to lose again, or were to get to the SEC championship game and lose, and they are on the cusp between them and somebody else to get into that final playoff spot, that loss to Vanderbilt is going to be huge. Because while Vanderbilt is 3-2 this season, those other 2 wins are to Virginia Tech, who's average at best, and a 55-0 win against Alcorn State. So, while this Vanderbilt team might look slightly better than they have in the past, this is not a team that's going to fight for anything in the postseason. This is a team that in the last 25 years has made it to a handful of bowl games. They're not a competitive school. They're an academic school that also happens to be really good at baseball. This is the biggest win in their program history, and will probably be the biggest win in their program history for at least another quarter century. And I fear that for Kalen DoBoer, this will be the game that defines his tenure at Alabama. If my prediction is correct and he's gone in 4 years, I don't think there's going to be a national championship on that resume. There's probably going to be a couple of playoff appearances, possibly an SEC championship, but I believe the defining mark on his Alabama resume is going to be this loss to Vanderbilt. Think about it. We still talk about the 2007 App State-Michigan game where Appalachian State upset the University of Michigan. Now, Vanderbilt is an SEC team. App State was on a much lower rung. But as far as expectation to win, Vanderbilt's on the same level as App State. So it's been 17 years. And that upset is still on the tips of our tongues. It's still one of the things most synonymous with Michigan football in the last 25 years. It's still talked about all the time. And was that a defining moment of Lloyd Carr's career? No, because prior to that, he had had 12 good years at the University of Michigan. This happened in his final year at Michigan. He had 12 good years at the University of Michigan, 5 Big Ten titles, and 1 national championship. National championships can wipe away a lot of things. And so if Kalen DoBoer happens to win a national championship in the next 2, 3, 4 years, maybe we don't talk about this as much. But we'll definitely still talk about it because it's been 17 years and we still talk about Michigan versus App State. I do believe, as I mentioned, that this will be the defining moment of Kalen DoBoer's Alabama tenure. I was never a fan of the hire in the first place. And yes, he beat Georgia, but that was off a bye, and they almost blew a huge lead, and those were still mostly Saban's guys. We'll have to wait until next year to see how good of a coach he actually is at this level. But the loss to Vanderbilt is certainly a huge black mark on his record at the University of Alabama. Moving on from there, some history was made in the NBA preseason as LeBron James and Bronny James shared the floor together for the first time, making them the first father-son duo to ever be on the court at the same time. It's happened in Major League Baseball. It's happened in the NHL. This is the first time it's happened in the NBA. And yes, it was a preseason game. Nobody really cares. The Lakers lost 118 to 114 to the Suns, but it was still a major moment to talk about. LeBron James and Bronny James sharing the floor together for the first time, making NBA history. LeBron James had this to say about the feat. He said, "For a father, it means everything. For someone who didn't have that growing up, to be able to have that influence on your kids and have influence on your son, be able to have moments with your son, and ultimately to be able to work with your son. I think that's one of the greatest things that a father can ever hope for or wish for." First-year coach J.J. Redick also said, "We knew we wanted to make this happen. It was a special moment, and we wanted them on the floor together." And as somebody who can take a step back, and if you've listened to this podcast for a while, you know I'm not the biggest LeBron fan. That's just true. But what I do have to applaud him for, and I've said this on the podcast before, is that there were two things that he said throughout his career at various stages that he wanted to accomplish. From day one, he said he wanted to bring a championship to Cleveland. In 2016, he did that. And as his career continued, and he went from the young superstar to the wise old veteran, and this became a clear option. He said, "I want to be in the league long enough to play alongside my son." And maybe when he said that, he didn't think it was possible to be on the same team as him, but he wanted to be in the league at the same time as his son. And we've seen him take very good care of himself physically to be able to have that longevity, and that longevity is really impressive. He has had some injuries in the last few years that have kept him off the court, but here he is. And in his age 40 season, he's sharing the court with his son. So the two things LeBron James has said that he's wanted throughout his career, he's now accomplished them. And as a sports fan, as I said, I'm not the biggest LeBron fan. As a sports fan, I have to take a step back and say, wow, that is really something. So congratulations to the James family on this really cool accomplishment. And we will see how they work together in the regular season. There was an opportunity for a father-son assist as LeBron James kicked it out to Bronny for a three, but Bronny missed. But they still got to share the floor together, and that's really, really cool. On a more somber note, as we stay in the NBA, I want to mention that earlier this week, or last week, more likely it's Monday as we're recording this. Last week, the NBA lost a legend. Dikembe Mutombo passed away at the age of 58 after a battle with brain cancer. When you think of the greatest players of all time in the NBA, Mutombo's name doesn't come up. But he is probably one of the more notable players in the NBA because of the finger wag that he would do after he blocked a shot, the no, the commercials. He was a beloved figure in the world of the NBA, and it's not going to be the same without Dikembe. He was an 8-time All-Star, a 4-time Defensive Player of the Year. He was second all-time in block shots. That's what he was known best for. And he made it to the 2001 NBA Finals with the Philadelphia 76ers before they lost in 5 games to the Lakers. So I just want to take a quick minute and remember Dikembe Mutombo. A lot of younger fans remember him from his commercials where he would do the finger wag in the commercial. Some of us got to see it happen on live television, and he was just an extremely likable player, and he was a very accomplished player, and he will be missed by NBA teams and fans. Rest in peace, Dikembe Mutombo. Moving on to the NFL. Just a couple news and notes from another week in the NFL. We've reached week 5. Tonight, the Saints and Chiefs will square off to see if the Chiefs can remain undefeated or if it will just be the Minnesota Vikings standing alone at 5-0. Before we see who wins that game, let's touch on a couple of things that happened on Sunday. As I mentioned, Minnesota stays perfect. Sam Darnold didn't have the biggest game. Neither did Justin Jefferson by his standards in the 9:30 a.m. tilt in London, but they did do enough to defeat Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. Things are not looking great for the Jets right now in New York. They suffered a 10-9 loss last week against the Broncos, and now this week they go to London and get beat by admittedly the best team in the NFL, but Aaron Rodgers had multiple turnovers, didn't look great, and things are not going well in New York, despite what a lot of fans were hoping for when Aaron Rodgers was healthy again. Last year's NFC representative in the Super Bowl, San Francisco 49ers, look a bit shaky after blowing a 23-10 halftime lead and losing 24-23 to Kyler Murray and the Arizona Cardinals. Kyler Murray is starting to look like the player he was a couple of years ago, but this is more of a cause for concern for the San Francisco 49ers. They do have a lot of injuries on their team right now, but we have to wonder, will we see the 49ers turn it around? Jayden Daniels keeps the Washington Commanders rolling. They are now 4-1. He looked really good again yesterday against the Cleveland Browns, although the Cleveland Browns mostly looked awful. Something needs to change in Cleveland, which is crazy considering last year they had the league's best defense. Kevin Stefanski is coach of the year. And it's not often, and I was thinking about this as I was watching it yesterday, that you get your starting quarterback back healthy and get significantly worse than you were the year before. But that is what we're seeing in Cleveland. The defense is not the same. Deshaun Watson is completely washed, and things are looking bad in Cleveland. The coach of the year might now be on the hot seat. That's how bad this looks. Speaking of hot seats, the Jacksonville Jags got their first win of the season in a shootout against the Indianapolis Colts. So they are now 1-4. I do believe that Doug Peterson's seat is still very, very, very hot. And while Trevor Lawrence looked a lot better on Sunday, we have to see several more weeks of it in a row for me to believe that Doug Peterson's job is safe. That is, after all, a $55 million a year quarterback, and it's going to take more than one win to cool down Doug Peterson's chair. Cincinnati falls to 1-4 after another close loss to an AFC rival. They lost 41-38 to the Baltimore Ravens, who are suddenly one of the hottest teams in the NFL, winning 3 in a row after starting 0-2. Lamar Jackson does look like an MVP candidate yet again. Derrick Henry is finally looking comfortable in his role in Baltimore. And after having a 35-25 lead late in that game, Cincinnati falls to 1-4. It now looks like a long shot that they will make the playoffs. After just a week ago, we were talking about the teams who had made the playoffs after starting 0-3. But it does seem like it's becoming more and more far-fetched as we get closer to the halfway point of the season. It's hard to believe that we're already 5 weeks in, but here we are. And Dallas outlasts Pittsburgh in a Sunday night showdown that went into the morning thanks to an hour-and-a-half rain delay in Pittsburgh. And Dallas did get the win, but the overwhelming thing that I saw there was Dallas is just bad. It seems like the media talks about Dallas all the time. It's always about Jerry Jones. It's always about Dak Prescott. It's always about Micah Parsons and injuries and this and that. And yes, they do have injuries to Micah Parsons and DeMarcus Lawrence, but Dallas is just bad. They're really bad. They had to put Brandon Cooks on IR. CeeDee Lamb looks pretty fed up on the sidelines. After Dak played at an MVP level. He maybe should have won the MVP a year ago. He himself played okay. The defense had a good first half, but really, I thought they could have done more to slow down Justin Fields and a Pittsburgh offense that hasn't put up the most points this season. So I think it's time to say that Dallas is just really bad. And for as good as the Washington Commanders are looking, I think it's safe to say that we are in for yet another year where the NFC East has a different champion. It's been 20 years since the NFC East has had a repeat champion. Last year's champion was the Dallas Cowboys, and after a 3-2 start where they have not looked very good at all, with as good as Jayden Daniels and the Washington Commanders are looking, I can't see Dallas overtaking. Just 5 weeks in, I can't see Dallas figuring it out soon enough to outplay Washington for that division. And I'll just go ahead and say it. Through 5 weeks, what I've seen from Jayden Daniels and the Washington Commanders, I think Jayden Daniels has a realistic chance to be the first rookie since Jim Brown in 1957 to win MVP in his rookie season. That's how well he's played for Washington. And I mentioned it a couple of weeks ago when Washington played Cincinnati on Monday Night Football. The poise that Daniels has for a rookie 5 games in is unbelievable. I saw something this morning. I believe Jayden Daniels is the first player, the first QB in NFL history to have 1,000 yards passing and 250 yards rushing in his first 5 career games. Jim Brown is the only player in NFL history to win the MVP award in his rookie season. We saw C.J. Stroud get pretty darn close a year ago. You could have made an argument for C.J. Stroud to become the second ever, but I really think Jayden Daniels has an opportunity to become the second player ever to win NFL MVP in his rookie season. And speaking of rookie quarterbacks, the last thing I want to touch on before we get out of the NFL is the fact that we've talked about Caleb Williams a couple times on this podcast, and as I mentioned before, not the biggest fan, but I do have to commend him. He is. It's hard to compare to what Jayden Daniels is doing because he's doing it so fast. He's already an MVP contender in my mind through 5 weeks. But I do have to commend Caleb Williams, who is coming along at a much more realistic pace for a rookie quarterback. And he has gotten better and better every week. This week against Carolina, granted the worst team in the NFL, but this week against Carolina, Chicago won 36-10 to move to 3-2 on the season. Caleb Williams was 20 of 29 for 304 yards. That's an average of 10.5 yards per completion. 2 touchdowns, no interceptions. He was only sacked once. This is something we really should look at and say, hey, like, we give him a lot of crap. We almost expect him to do what Jayden Daniels is doing. That's not fair of everybody. It's generational that guys like C.J. Stroud and Jayden Daniels come in to the highest level of the sport and dominate. So it's unfair for us to hold everybody to that standard. But Caleb Williams is showing the kind of growth that you want to see in a rookie quarterback. Each game is better than the game that came before it. He was accurate in this one. He threw the ball down the field a lot more than he had in previous games. He didn't throw an interception. He had multiple touchdowns. I think that is commendable, and we got to keep an eye on him as he continues to grow, because I do believe that he can be what people expected him to be. Just give him a little bit more time. But we are seeing that growth from Caleb Williams. It's just harder to recognize because of how fast Jayden Daniels has taken off in this league. A year after C.J. Stroud pretty much did the same thing. To close out, we're moving on to Major League Baseball, and I want to start with the solemn news here. baseball's all-time hits leader and a very controversial figure at that, Pete Rose has passed away at the age of 83. You can feel however you want to about Pete Rose, and the way you feel is valid. He did bet on baseball. Some believe he did cheat the game. But some also believe he's the all-time hit leader and he should be in the Hall of Fame. Whatever your argument is, he is Major League Baseball's all-time leader in hits, singles, games played, plate appearances, and at-bats. He's a 17-time All-Star, 3-time World Series champion, 3-time batting champion, 2-time Gold Glove Award winner, the 1973 NL MVP, and the 1975 World Series MVP. Regardless of how you feel about Pete Rose, he was one of the most beloved players on the field of a lot of people for multiple generations. He had his demons off the field, and that's what stained his legacy and what we now know him from, or what we know most of him. But his nickname on the field was Charlie Hustle, because he played the game at 100%. And, I did write a piece on EmpireSportsTalk.com about Pete Rose and whether or not he should be considered for the Hall of Fame. But on this platform, I do just want to take a moment to acknowledge the Major League Baseball's all-time hit leader and say rest in peace to Pete Rose, a.k.a. Charlie Hustle. Your personality will certainly be missed. He was one of the biggest personalities I think we've ever seen come across Major League Baseball. And in a sport that sometimes feels like personalities of players can be dampened by the strict tradition of the game, Pete Rose was somebody that played the game at 100% and played it for as long as he physically could, because he physically did not want to step away from the game until he was banned in 1989. He transitioned from being a player directly into being a manager. It was something he never wanted to give up. And unfortunately, whether or not he will one day find his way into the Hall of Fame, he will unfortunately not be there to see it. So rest in peace, Pete Rose. Your legacy will certainly not soon be forgotten. But on to more exciting news. The MLB postseason continues. The New York Mets are tied with the Phillies 1-1 in the NLDS, whereas on the other side, San Diego and Los Angeles, tempers flared in Game 2 of that series that San Diego won 10-2 to even up the series at a game apiece. There was tension all night. These are two bitter rivals. San Diego for years has been seen as the little brother to the Dodgers. And so anytime they get together in the postseason, it gets pretty contentious. And there was one moment of levity in this otherwise tense game was San Diego outfielder Jurickson Profar went back to the wall on a Mookie Betts line drive and brought it back for a home run robbery. Many people, including Mookie Betts and the broadcast team for a minute, believed that it was a home run because Jurickson didn't immediately show the ball to the camera or to teammates, to anyone. He grabbed it and he stood right in front of the fans in the outfield, and did a little he did a little dance. He did some hopping to be like, "Hey guys, I got it." You can there were even fans a few rows back from that were celebrating, thinking that it had gotten into the stands, but Jurickson had it in his glove the whole time. And I must say, it has been a pleasure as a diehard baseball fan. It has been a pleasure to see Jurickson Profar succeed with the Padres in the last couple of years, because Jurickson, once upon a time, was a top prospect in baseball for the Texas Rangers. He was supposed to come in right after Elvis Andrus and be their next great player, and he just struggled to the point where so many people were calling him a bust, and he bounced. He did make it to the major leagues, but he bounced around the league for a long time before finally landing with the San Diego Padres and coming into his own, probably a little bit later than the Rangers would have liked, and a little bit later than Major League Baseball fans would have expected. But from a baseball standpoint, it is fun to see Jurickson Profar kind of have his moment in the sun with the San Diego Padres so many years after he was a top prospect. But later in the game, tempers did flare when fans began throwing stuff onto the field. One fan threw a baseball out of the stands at Jurickson Profar. Fans were throwing things at Padres pitchers in the bullpen. Players were jawing back and forth. Dave Roberts was putting his 2 cents in from the dugout. It was happening all night long. Like I said, a rivalry like this, it's gonna be tense. It's gonna be interesting, and I expect to see some of that between the Mets and Phillies as that series gets further along. The Guardians took a 1-0 lead against the Tigers, who did dispatch of the Houston Astros, and to the relief of most baseball fans, the Astros streak of consecutive LCS appearances is over at the hands of the Detroit Tigers. Then you have the Cleveland Guardians go up 1-0 on them in the ALDS. The Yankees took a 1-0 lead from the Royals in the other ALDS. In fact, let's update, because I believe there was a game at 4 o'clock. Let's update ourselves here, shall we? At the time of recording this, it is a scoreless game at the end of the 8th inning in Game 2 between the Tigers and the Guardians. That's a pivotal game in what is just a best-of-5 series in the ALDS. And the Yankees and Royals kick off here in just about an hour for Game 2 of that series. I do believe Cleveland is going to win this series. I think it's been hard for me all season to pick between the Guardians and the Yankees for who I thought was going to be the AL representative in the World Series. I've gone back and forth. At the time when I made my predictions, when the postseason bracket became official, I said the Yankees, but I do believe the ALCS is going to be Yankees and Guardians, and the best team will prevail. I would be super excited to see that matchup. But until we get there, we have to get through the division series. They've been competitive. They've been exciting between the Mets and the Phillies. The Phillies walked off in Game 2 to even up that series. Cannot wait to see how the Major League Baseball postseason shakes out. That's all I have for you on this one as we edge ever closer to the 100th episode. Again, like I said at the top of the show, I just want to thank those of you who have been with us the entire time. I know we haven't grown as fast as some other channels or some other podcasts, but this has been a long, long, long journey, longer than some people realize, and I appreciate those who have been with us and have shown up new as we continue this journey. And I just can't thank you enough. But until the next episode, I am Roman Gennaro. This has been Empire Sports Talk. Today's a good day to go 1-0, and I'll see you on the next one.